The silence began exactly 17 seconds after the humans stood up and left. At first, no one noticed the significance of those empty seconds. The Galactic Council chamber, an immense circular hall suspended inside the heart of the Citadel of Unity, continued to shimmer beneath towering columns of living crystal. Holographic constellations drifted lazily across the vaulted ceiling, reflecting thousands of stars that had once symbolized cooperation between civilizations. Representatives from more than 300 species remained seated around the colossal chamber, their robes, exoskeletons, and ceremonial armor catching the pale blue glow of the council floor. For centuries, this room had decided the fate of entire solar systems. Wars had ended here. Empires had risen here. Worlds had been saved with nothing more than a unanimous vote. Yet on this day, something far more dangerous than war had taken place. Humanity had simply walked away. No threats echoed through the chamber. No angry accusations followed them. Not a single human delegate looked back as the towering doors sealed behind them with a deep metallic rumble that seemed to vibrate through the station itself. Ambassador Elena Hayes had paused only once before crossing the threshold, her expression unreadable beneath the soft light reflecting across polished silver insignias on her uniform. She had spent years warning the Council that their endless political games were blinding them to a growing danger beyond explored space. Every report had been dismissed. Every request had been delayed. Every warning had become another topic buried beneath committees, debates, and ceremonial speeches. Now there were no words left to speak. For a heartbeat, confusion lingered across alien faces. Then came the laughter. Some delegates exchanged amused glances. Others whispered smug congratulations, convinced humanity had finally abandoned its futile campaign to influence galactic policy. A reptilian senator slowly applauded. Several influential houses interpreted the departure as an admission of defeat, proof that Earth's growing influence had finally collapsed beneath political pressure. Across diplomatic channels, encrypted celebrations quietly spread between worlds that had long viewed humans as stubborn idealists, useful engineers, capable soldiers, but ultimately emotional newcomers who had overestimated their importance. Glasses were raised. Agreements were signed before the human seats had even cooled. Only a handful noticed what was missing. The human communication arrays embedded throughout the Citadel shut down one after another, so quietly that automated systems logged them as routine maintenance. Embassy beacons disappeared from navigation networks. Freight schedules vanished from civilian databases. Supply fleets altered their routes without broadcasting new destinations. Hidden beneath layers of routine traffic, billions of encrypted transmissions pulsed through quantum channels for only fractions of a second before dissolving into silence. Every signal carried the same command. Every human colony, every military outpost, every scientific station acknowledged without hesitation. Protocol exodus had begun. Far beyond the Council's viewports, Earth's vessels slipped away from their assigned patrols with impossible precision. Massive colony arcs rotated toward deep space corridors that officially did not exist. Entire orbital shipyards extinguished their lights, becoming invisible against the darkness between stars. Families packed their lives without panic because preparations had begun years earlier. Children asked quiet questions their parents could not answer. Soldiers boarded carriers without speeches or fanfare. Engineers activated machines that had remained dormant for decades. Across humanity, no one celebrated. No one cried. They simply moved with the calm certainty of people following a plan they had prayed would never be needed. Inside the council chamber, the debates resumed almost immediately. No one understood that the silence left behind by humanity was not surrender. It was a warning. And by the time the galaxy realized why the humans had chosen to leave without firing a single shot, the stars themselves would already be screaming. The Citadel of Unity floated like an artificial star at the crossroads of the Orion Arm, its impossible silhouette visible from millions of kilometers away. Rings of gleaming white alloy rotated around its massive core, generating gravity for countless districts where diplomats, scientists, merchants, and military officers from hundreds of civilizations crossed paths every day. Rivers of glowing transport lanes flowed between docking towers as vessels of every imaginable design drifted through carefully orchestrated traffic. Towering spires reached into the darkness, each crowned with shimmering energy beacons that pulsed like the heartbeat of a civilization convinced its reign would never end. To the rest of the galaxy, the Citadel represented peace. To Commander Elena Hayes, it had become a monument to complacency. Standing alone beside a panoramic observation window, Elena watched stars drift slowly beyond the transparent alloy glass. Somewhere among those distant lights was Earth, a blue world hidden beneath layers of classified defenses and growing increasingly isolated from the political games unfolding here. She had spent nearly 10 years serving as humanity's senior representative, believing diplomacy could accomplish what war never should. She had negotiated ceasefires, rebuilt shattered alliances, and prevented conflicts that would have consumed entire sectors. Yet every success felt smaller than the danger she knew was approaching. The reports kept arriving. Long-range probes vanished beyond mapped space. Ancient listening stations detected impossible gravitational disturbances. Entire research expeditions disappeared without distress calls. Every new discovery pointed toward the same terrifying conclusion. Something was moving in the darkness. She had presented the evidence dozens of times before the Council. Detailed simulations. Scientific models. Military projections. Every presentation ended the same way. Endless debates. Requests for additional verification. Political accusations that humanity exaggerated unknown threats to secure larger defense budgets. They called her cautious, alarmist, even manipulative. None of them saw the fear hidden beneath her calm expression, not fear for herself, but for billions who trusted leaders too comfortable to imagine they could ever be wrong. Far from the gleaming towers of the Citadel, humanity had already begun preparing for a future few believed would arrive. Deep inside forgotten asteroid belts, colossal shipyards worked without pause beneath cloaking fields invisible to civilian sensors. Entire moons had been hollowed into manufacturing complexes where autonomous drones assembled warships in complete silence. Research stations buried beneath frozen oceans unlocked technologies recovered from ancient ruins older than recorded galactic history. Every scientist understood the urgency. Every engineer accepted impossible deadlines. Every soldier trained harder than ever before, not because war was inevitable, but because survival demanded preparation long before the first battle began. The mission was never conquest. It was continuity. Human civilization quietly transformed itself into something resilient enough to survive the collapse of everything it had helped build. Supply networks expanded into hidden sectors. Emergency colonies awakened after decades of dormancy. Artificial ecosystems capable of sustaining millions were tested in complete secrecy. Even civilian schools introduced new emergency protocols disguised as routine preparedness exercises. Families noticed subtle changes, but few understood their purpose. Those who asked difficult questions received reassuring smiles that concealed unbearable truths. Elena closed her eyes for a single moment, remembering Earth's oceans, the sound of rain against her childhood home, and the faces of people who would never know how close the galaxy stood to disaster. She wished the Council could see what she had seen through classified reconnaissance feeds, the empty systems, the impossible signals, the evidence that something ancient had begun to stir beyond the edge of explored space. But wishes had long since lost their value. As another council session summoned her back into the endless cycle of speeches and political theater, she straightened her uniform and walked toward the chamber with quiet determination. If diplomacy failed, history would remember that humanity had tried. And if history survived what was coming, it would also remember that while the galaxy argued over power, humanity had been preparing for the end of everything. The first star died without an explosion. There was no brilliant supernova. No violent shockwave racing across the void. The light simply vanished. Astronomers on distant observation platforms stared in stunned silence as an entire stellar system disappeared from every sensor at once, as though an invisible hand had reached into the galaxy and extinguished a sun that had burned for billions of years. Automated probes transmitted garbled fragments of data before their signals dissolved into static. Long-range telescopes found only darkness where life, trade routes, and thriving colonies had existed the day before. At first, the Galactic Council dismissed the reports as equipment failure. Then a second star went dark. Then a third. Within days, panic spread faster than official announcements could contain it. Emergency channels flooded with desperate pleas for assistance. Merchant convoys vanished between hyperspace gates. Frontier governors declared martial law as refugees poured toward the core worlds carrying stories too terrifying to believe. They spoke of impossible shadows moving between stars. Of worlds swallowed by black oceans of living metal. Of moons stripped bare in a matter of hours. Entire civilizations disappeared before distress calls could even be completed. Every report sounded different, yet every survivor described the same overwhelming feeling, the certainty that something ancient was hunting the galaxy with absolute patience. Then the enemy finally revealed itself. The fabric of space twisted open like torn silk above the border system of Kalar Prime. Thousands of defense satellites locked onto the anomaly, but their targeting computers failed to classify what emerged. Colossal biomechanical entities drifted from the fracture, each one larger than a capital ship, their black exoskeletons rippling with veins of molten crimson energy. They moved without visible engines, without formations, without urgency. They advanced with the calm confidence of predators entering familiar hunting grounds. Around them, smaller constructs peeled away like fragments of a living swarm, consuming asteroids, satellites, and stations as raw material. Every weapon fired by the planetary fleet dissolved harmlessly against shimmering gravitational fields that seemed to drink energy instead of resisting it. The battle lasted 11 minutes. Millions watched the live transmission before it abruptly ended in blinding static. Inside the council chamber, the atmosphere transformed overnight. The same delegates who had mocked humanity's warnings now shouted over one another in frantic desperation. Emergency votes replaced ceremonial debates. Fleets were ordered to mobilize, alliances formed and collapsed within hours, and centuries of political pride evaporated beneath the weight of fear. Yet every decision arrived too late. Military doctrines built around conventional warfare crumbled against an enemy that ignored every known law of combat. Entire armadas disappeared without leaving wreckage behind. Planetary shields folded inward like paper. Quantum communications fractured as hyperspace itself became unstable. Only then did the Council discover what humanity's absence truly meant. The engineers who maintained half the galaxy's defense networks were gone. Human logistics fleets that coordinated emergency relief had vanished. The tactical AIs designed by Earth no longer responded to Council authority. Medical ships that once stabilized refugee crises had quietly departed weeks earlier. Even the hidden infrastructure supporting interstellar supply chains had been built upon human systems no one else fully understood. Piece by piece, the illusion of galactic stability collapsed, revealing just how deeply humanity had been holding everything together. In desperation, the Council transmitted emergency priority messages toward Earth. They requested military assistance, scientific consultation, human leadership. Again and again, encrypted signals crossed the stars, carrying pleas that would have been unthinkable only weeks earlier. But every transmission reached the Sol system only to encounter a silent defensive perimeter. No reply came back. Beyond Earth's quiet borders, the galaxy burned, and for the first time in its history, the Galactic Council faced the darkness completely alone. The answer the Galactic Council had spent decades ignoring was buried beneath its own foundations. As the Devourers advanced deeper into civilized space, emergency teams descended into the Citadel's forgotten archives, vaults so ancient that most living species had never known they existed. The corridors stretched endlessly beneath the council chamber, carved from dark alloy older than the station itself. Dust floated through pale beams of emergency lighting while failing power conduits hissed behind sealed walls. Ancient security systems, untouched for centuries, awakened with mechanical groans as archivist drones escorted frightened officials toward records classified beyond the highest levels of government. Every second mattered. Entire sectors were disappearing from the galactic map, and somewhere inside these forgotten chambers lay humanity's final sealed intelligence package, a file automatically released only if Earth ever withdrew from the Council. The chamber door opened with a deafening metallic echo. Inside stood a single crystalline data pillar surrounded by holographic warning symbols. Across its surface, one phrase repeated in hundreds of galactic languages. If humanity has left. You waited too long, ****. Silence consumed the room. Council Chancellor Vorik, whose voice had once commanded entire star systems, hesitated before placing a trembling hand against the crystal. The archive came alive instantly. Holographic stars filled the darkness, slowly assembling into a map of the known galaxy. Then the map expanded. It continued beyond every explored border, revealing regions no official survey had ever acknowledged. Vast sections of empty space were suddenly covered with crimson markers stretching between galaxies like veins beneath skin. Then the recording began. Commander Elena Hayes appeared, not as a diplomat addressing politicians, but as a soldier carrying the weight of unbearable knowledge. Her expression was calm, yet exhaustion lingered behind her eyes. If you are seeing this, she said quietly, then the devourers have returned, and humanity has already departed. The room fell completely still. She explained that more than 2 centuries before humanity's admission into the Galactic Council, Earth's first deep-range exploration program had uncovered impossible ruins drifting in intergalactic darkness. Those structures contained fragments of a civilization so ancient that no surviving species remembered its name. Within the ruins were warnings, records describing a cosmic predator that emerged in cycles separated by millions of years. The devourers did not conquer civilizations. They harvested them. Every advanced empire eventually produced enough energy, enough technology, enough stellar activity to become visible across the void. The devourers simply followed the light. Humanity had spent generations verifying those discoveries in absolute secrecy. Every unexplained disappearance beyond mapped space. Every lost colony. Every silent research expedition. Every distorted gravitational wave had confirmed the same horrifying truth. The enemy was real. It was approaching. And no conventional fleet could stop it without decades of preparation. The hologram shifted. Images appeared of hidden shipyards buried inside nebulae, underground research facilities carved into rogue planets, and enormous evacuation arcs concealed beyond ordinary navigation routes. Every technological breakthrough humanity had shared with the Council had carried a hidden purpose. Improved reactor grids. Reinforced hyperspace relays. Planetary shield upgrades. Advanced medical nanotechnology. They were never political gifts. They were survival infrastructure. We joined the Council, Elena continued, not because humanity needed protection, but because the galaxy did. Another silence settled over the archive. She admitted that Earth had repeatedly submitted evidence of the coming threat, only to watch it buried beneath bureaucracy, budget disputes, and political ambition. With every rejected warning, humanity quietly activated another stage of protocol exodus. Secret colonies expanded. Defense fleets multiplied. Entire populations rehearsed emergency relocations disguised as routine military exercises. Earth never abandoned hope that the Council would listen. But hope could not replace preparation. The final image showed humanity's fleets vanishing into hidden corridors between the stars long before the first devourer crossed the galactic border. We did not leave because we were afraid, Elena's voice echoed through the chamber. We left because remaining under your command would have doomed our species alongside yours. Survival required a choice no leader should ever have to make. The recording ended. Darkness reclaimed the archive. For several long moments, no one moved. No one spoke. Every proud accusation ever made against humanity echoed inside their minds with unbearable clarity. The humans had never been seeking power, influence, or control. They had been standing guard over a galaxy that refused to believe it was in danger. And now, the Guardians were gone. The Council's final stronghold was already collapsing when the stars themselves seemed to awaken. Above the shattered fortress world of Asterion Prime, the void burned with streaks of blue-white light that tore across space in perfect formation. At first, exhausted defenders believed the strange brilliance marked the arrival of another devourer swarm. Planetary sensors screamed under impossible energy readings. Gravitational fields fluctuated so violently that shattered moons drifted from their ancient orbits. Across command bunkers buried deep beneath the planet's surface, frightened officers watched tactical displays fill with thousands of unknown contacts emerging from hyperspace at once. The numbers were so overwhelming that the computers initially classified them as sensor failure. Then the identification codes appeared. Human. One by one. Then thousands more. Across the bridge of the flagship Resolute Dawn, Commander Elena Hayes stood before an immense tactical display that stretched from floor to ceiling. The holographic battlefield pulsed with crimson icons marking devourer fleets advancing toward billions of trapped civilians. Around her, officers moved with calm precision, not because the situation was under control, but because every member of the crew had trained for this exact moment their entire lives. There were no speeches. No celebrations at finally being proven right. Only focused determination. Elena activated the fleet-wide transmission. Her face appeared across every surviving military frequency in the galaxy, broadcast simultaneously to terrified civilians, desperate soldiers, and the leaders who had once dismissed her warnings. "You chose politics," she said, her steady voice cutting through the chaos. "We chose preparation." The transmission ended. Humanity attacked. Slip space ruptured across the battlefield as entire carrier groups deployed autonomous drone swarms that spread through space like shimmering constellations. Massive gravity lances fired in synchronized volleys, folding local spacetime around advancing devourer formations. Enemy vessels that had shrugged off every conventional weapon suddenly twisted inward beneath crushing gravitational collapse, their living armor cracking apart as miniature singularities consumed them from within. Behind the assault fleets came colossal mobile shipyards, manufacturing fresh fighters and repair craft even while under enemy fire. Every movement reflected decades of planning. Every maneuver anticipated responses that no other civilization had even known were possible. But victory demanded more than technology. It demanded sacrifice. At the collapsing Helios Gateway, a narrow hyperspace corridor remained open just long enough for refugee convoys to escape. Tens of millions of civilians crowded aboard overloaded transports, fleeing worlds already consumed by darkness. Holding the passage stood the 7th Human Expeditionary Fleet, hopelessly outnumbered. Captain Marcus Voss received the evacuation confirmation in silence. He knew what came next before anyone spoke the order. He smiled faintly. "Mission accomplished," he whispered. His fleet accelerated directly into the heart of the Devourer Armada. One after another, human warships overloaded their stellar core reactors, creating controlled gravitational detonations that ripped apart enemy formations and bought precious minutes for every escaping transport. The explosions illuminated the darkness like newborn suns, each sacrifice carving another path toward survival. Throughout the galaxy, similar stories unfolded. Engineers remained inside failing fusion stations to stabilize planetary shields. Medical crews refused evacuation until the final wounded child boarded rescue vessels. Scientists activated experimental stellar engines that consumed entire devourer clusters, fully aware the blasts would erase their own research stations forever. Humanity never fought to be remembered. They fought so others could have a future worth remembering. As the battle reached its final hour, the Devourers adapted, converging into a single colossal entity unlike anything humanity's simulations had predicted. It dwarfed planets, its immense body wrapped in rivers of crimson energy, blotting out entire constellations. For one terrible moment, silence spread across every human command network. Then Elena gave one final order. The hidden weapon humanity had spent generations building, the Horizon Array, came online. Across dozens of concealed star systems, ancient stellar engines synchronized with impossible precision. Energy gathered from multiple suns flowed into a lattice stretching across light years. Space itself trembled. Time seemed to hesitate. A single beam of blinding white light crossed the galaxy. When the brilliance faded, the monstrous devourer was gone. The surviving enemy fleet scattered into the darkness, retreating beyond the edge of known space for the first time in countless ages. The battle was over. The cost had been unimaginable. But as dawn rose over Asterion Prime and billions of survivors looked toward the silent human armada drifting among the wreckage, one truth became impossible to deny. Humanity had never abandoned the galaxy. They had simply prepared to save it, when no one else would. When the last echoes of war finally faded, the galaxy was almost unrecognizable. Entire constellations bore the scars of the Devourer invasion. Once brilliant trade routes had become silent graveyards of shattered starships drifting endlessly through the void. Planets that had once glowed with sprawling cities now carried dark continents where oceans reflected abandoned orbital wreckage. Rescue beacons blinked across thousands of systems, their lonely signals piercing a silence that felt heavier than any explosion. The smoke of battle had disappeared, but the weight of survival lingered in every corner of known space. For the first time in countless generations, the Galactic Council understood what true peace actually cost. The council chamber itself remained untouched. No one dared alter it. The circular hall still shimmered beneath its crystalline ceiling, but the atmosphere had changed forever. The seats once occupied by humanity stood exactly as they had on the day Commander Elena Hayes and her delegation quietly walked away. Their nameplates remained illuminated. Translation consoles rested in perfect silence. Not even the layer of cosmic dust gathering upon the polished desks was disturbed. Delegates entering the chamber lowered their voices without being asked, instinctively treating the empty section not as abandoned furniture, but as sacred ground. Every meeting now began with a long moment of silence, a reminder that arrogance had nearly destroyed everything they had sworn to protect. Across the recovering galaxy, reconstruction replaced conquest. Human engineering fleets worked alongside former rivals without demanding territory or political favors. Massive orbital foundries forged new habitats for civilizations that had lost their homeworlds. Terraforming arrays slowly breathed life back into poisoned planets. Medical convoys crossed sectors once divided by centuries of hatred, delivering supplies to species that had once voted against every human proposal. Children from dozens of worlds played together inside refugee academies built by human volunteers, too young to remember the fear that had nearly erased their futures. Humanity never demanded repayment. They simply kept rebuilding, one world at a time. Months later, representatives from every surviving civilization traveled to Earth. Not as rulers. Not as negotiators. But as grateful survivors. Their convoy descended through Earth's blue skies toward the restored International Assembly overlooking oceans untouched by war. The air carried the scent of rain and pine forests, sounds unfamiliar to many alien visitors whose worlds had been transformed into lifeless battlefields. They expected triumph. They expected monuments celebrating humanity's victory. Instead, they found memorial gardens stretching peacefully across rolling hills, each stone engraved not with military achievements, but with the names of every species that had fallen defending the galaxy together. Human children wandered quietly among the pathways, placing fresh flowers beneath names they could not even pronounce. Commander Elena Hayes stood alone beside one of the memorial walls as the delegation approached. Age had begun to leave gentle lines across her face, yet her eyes carried the same calm resolve that had guided humanity through its darkest hour. The Chancellor stepped forward first, lowering himself in a gesture no council leader had ever offered another civilization. "We came to thank you," he said softly. "And to apologize." For a long moment, Elena simply looked toward the horizon where the evening sun melted into Earth's oceans, painting the sky with colors untouched by politics or war. "We didn't fight for gratitude," she replied at last. "We fought because life is worth protecting, even when those you're protecting don't yet understand why." No one answered. There were no speeches capable of matching the truth of those words. Years later, historians would record the Devourer War as the greatest conflict the galaxy had ever endured. They would study humanity's hidden preparations, its impossible sacrifices, and the courage of those who chose duty over recognition. But the lesson remembered most was far simpler than any military strategy or political treaty. Strength is not measured by the power to rule. It is measured by the willingness to stand alone when everyone else turns away. And so, every year, when the council gathered beneath the same crystal ceiling where humanity had once risen in silence, the empty seats remained exactly where they had always been, not as symbols of absence, but as a promise carved into the memory of the stars. That the greatest guardians are often the ones who ask for nothing. Until the day the galaxy needs them most.